The madman jumped into their midst and pierced their eyes. Whither is God? He cried. I will tell you. God is dead, God remains dead, and we have killed him. This is the most notorious excerpt from the famous German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche, who wrote it in his book The Gay Science in 1882. The statement may anger you, or it may horrify you, or it may flicker your candle of hope. To some of you, it may seem like an act or a statement of religious intolerance and disrespect, and others may feel like spamming their cursed vocabulary in the comment section. However, this is the sad, the bitter, and the ugly truth that Nietzsche was not only too soon to reveal but too early to protect. But who's Nietzsche anyway, and why should you even listen to this retarded bigot, you may ask, who attempted to peel the very skin off of our devoted souls with a statement? Well, Nietzsche is regarded as one of the most influential modern thinkers after the Age of Enlightenment. And he wasn't just any other philosopher who used to make his notes drinking coffee in the morning. Well, firstly, because he wasn't really able to drink his coffee in a proper way, thanks to his health. So, if there ever were a prize for suffering, Nietzsche would really have won it, my dear friends. So, here is how his story goes. His father died before his fifth birthday, though he excelled in theology, composition, and philosophy and graduated from a prestigious university, becoming a professor. The beginning of his demise started when he was just in his 20s. Nietzsche contracted dysentery and diphtheria in the Franco German War, which caused him to leave his profession. And in just a few years, he was living on a pension and moved into his new house with his sister and his friend. And the next decade for Nietzsche would prove to be one of his most loneliest and also the most creative, where he just spilled out his philosophy on paper like in lightning speed while living in boarding houses in Switzerland, half blinded, seriously ill, and in chronic pain with limited human contact. But even his will was cut short as his books received little to no attention. And in 1889, he literally collapsed into paralysis, which would take a year to end with his death. However, even after his death, calm was unheard of. His, his greedy sister made sure to have full authority of his literary works and represent him in untruthful ways that would associate Nietzsche's name with Adolf Hitler and fascism later. So, the tragic life and death of Nietzsche brought about this tragic truth of God is dead and we have killed him. Without context, this statement represents what he meant and blinds us from seeing how we still live in a world without God. But when we fully try to understand Nietzsche, we find that he was goddamn right to an extent. And through this episode of the Neutrally Biased podcast, we'll not only try to understand the interpretation of the statement God is dead and we have killed him, but also actually prove how we killed our own gods in the timeline of history. But before we move on, if I go on to ask you, who are you, what would you say? If you are like any other sane person, you would say your name. I am this. But think about it. Are you really your name? If I say I'm Jim Gorgon, well, Jim and Gorgon are just two words made up of 9 letters in total. If I say I'm this physical structure I see in the mirror every morning, but I'm not my body, it is just a well organized flesh arranged on a skeleton. I do not refer to it as am hand, am eyes, am brain, or am body called sick this morning. I say it is my body, my hand, my brain. If I say I'm a male, that's just another way of identifying my biological features. If I say I'm my age is just a number. And the same thing applies to you as well. You are not your name, you are not your body, you are not your age, you are not your gender. If someone makes a clone of you and gives it your name, would it be you? No, right? That would be a duplicate of you, but not you. So we may even go further asking, what are you? And if you are not what you supposed you were, are you even anything? Yet the answer to these mind boggling questions by buying our ebook Psychology of You for just $1 through the link in the caption. So now, let's get started. So in 1882, when Nietzsche declared that God was dead, he wasn't trying to implicate that someone above in the heaven controlling the universe has died. He meant that the idea of God in the postmodernist era, has died. God, according to him, existed as a fiction or a story all spiritual religions have been telling since their invention. We all believed in it for thousands of years and lost ourselves in the midst of afterlife and having a soul, and we sacrificed every bit of ourselves in devotion towards it. However, after the scientific revolution in the 16th century, we got detached from the story as we explored the realm of science and began to question the very existence and necessity of a supernatural entity. That's when, according to him, in search of the objective meaning, we killed God, our subjective meaning. As much of an atheist and a critic himself of the Judeo Christian traditions and religions, Nietzsche was not announcing this with a glimmer on his face. Rather, he encouraged to mourn the death of God and question what lies beyond it. He said, "Who will wipe this blood off of us? What water is there for us to clean ourselves? What festivals of atonement, what sacred games shall we have to invent? Is this not the greatness of this day too great for us? Must we ourselves not become gods simply to appear worthy of it?" Nietzsche became very scared of God's death. He feared that even though the story of God was a myth, we told ourselves it was not only the highest authority, but the only authority that existed above us. The myth of God was the only thing that gave our lives meaning, and without God, we were doomed. According to him, the reason we did not know about his death by then was because we worshipped God's shadow for thousands of years, and he said that his imprints will last for the next thousands of years. To him, like we were like some sort of a child woken up in the dead of the night to be told that our parents have died and we were suddenly orphaned. And just like that child, we would not know how to react and what to do. And he then predicted that in our future, when we realize this thing, it would push us to the brink of meaninglessness and nihilism. He thought that we would, in an attempt to govern our own fate, resort to a will to do nothing. Our lives will be full of pessimism and purposeless entertainment and pleasure. And therein, he also highlighted what would be required to counteract this dystopian self seizing future. He commanded that we would need to create our own values and and purpose as individuals. We would need to become what he called Ubermensch. I'm sorry if I pronounce that wrong. It is in German, and that is not my first language. And that word translated to English is a superman, one who creates the meaning of life while living it. Now, after we are familiar with the meaning behind the statement, the question you may have in mind would be, how true is it? You may say, well, we still practice our religions and believe in our God. There's no dystopian presiding over the world. In fact, we have made more progress than ever before. So, exactly is God even dead? That's exactly what we will discover through a slight glimpse into the history of religion. So, where was Nietzsche right and where did he fall wrong according to history? Ever since the beginning of the civilization, we have made our own religions and our own stories about gods. If you have read the famous book by Yuval Noah Harari, you will know that in *Sapiens*, he has beautifully written and beautifully explained that when we were transitioning from hunting to agriculture, it became important for us to have a good produce each year. But we could not have controlled all the other factors, all the other external factors while producing crops or harvesting crops like rainfall, sunshine, etc. And that is when the first of our religions emerged so that we could communicate with our crops and plants to give us a good harvest. So that is when also our first gods arrived. Our initial gods were like the local banyan trees whom we prayed to, or they sat at the other end of the ostrich feathers we reflected our misery on. So there was all type of gods that we had created through our many religions that emerged in our own localities. However, as these agricultural societies grew into larger empires, we saw an emergence of the several polytheistic religions, and later down the line, even monotheistic religions. These new religions changed the role of gods from just being a mediator between us and nature to being the supreme authority controlling us and determining our fate. We created elaborated rituals, the concept of afterlife to be with God, and prayers to ask from God. So our whole lives became God centric. We were governed by the laws written in our holy books, which we were told by the priests to have a superhuman validation. And that superhuman validation cannot be ever questioned. All our actions and inactions were to be determined by what the rabbis, pandits, and maulanas interpreted about requirements imposed by gods. And hell did they take full advantage of the innocence of the illiterate population. If the priests of that time did not like homosexuality, they could go on writing it as a law ending with the statement, God said so. If they did not want equal treatment for women in their religious practices, they could go on writing it down on the scriptures which people have to follow. Thus, the ethical judgments made in the medieval and ancient eras were based more on the personal opinions of the Christian bishops, Muslim Sufis, and devoted monks, given the superhuman validation than the words of God itself. So these times never saw free will because there was only God's will. And priests did a very, very good job in convincing people to follow this God's will. What they did was promising heaven but delivering hell. A crusader in 1069 AD was not going to Jerusalem because he wanted to help in the war during the Crusades, but because he was told it was the will of God for him to go and reclaim the holy city. And if he made it out alive, he would be rewarded by the church and for sure resort to the heaven in the afterlife. But even if he got killed, he would still go to heaven for he has fought for a noble cause. Priests lied and we believed in it for thousands of years straight. If a peasant in medieval Delhi went for a long hibernation in 1023 AD and woke up in 1523 AD, he would find the world to be much of the same as before he slept. Famines, plagues, and wars still doom the common people. Kings enjoy the lavish treatment. Peasants still struggle to make more money, and well, his wife is still infertile. And no wonder the problems remain the same for centuries, ever since we adopted these religions. Because we were so busy fulfilling the needs of God without knowing our own needs. But if the same person sleeps again in 1523 AD and wakes up in 2023 AD, the world would appear so fucking different to him that he may even wonder whether he is on the same planet or not. So, what happened in the last 500 years? Well, God died. Ever since the 1500s, we changed the dynamics of obtaining knowledge completely. The scientific revolution that emerged in the 16th century brought to us several new discoveries about the world, and as we discovered the reality behind these processes and intricacies of the world, our bond with spiritual religions actually loosened up over time. So earlier, the formula for the worldly knowledge in the times of religions, in the times of the spiritual religions, was that knowledge equated scriptures into logic. We studied the scriptures and the holy books of our respective religions, and we used our own reasoning and our own logic to determine what they meant about reality. For example, in this verse of Isaiah 40 by 22, this verse says that he sits enthroned above the circle of the earth, and its people are like grasshoppers. He stretches out the heavens like a canopy and spreads them out like a tent to live in. And this particular verse was used by many Christian scholars to prove that earth is flat. However, the scientific revolution changed the formula of knowledge into knowledge equals to empirical data into mathematics. Now, if a person in the scientific revolution needs to figure out what is the shape of Earth, he could use telescopes to measure the distance from celestial bodies from different points on Earth and form trigonometric equations to find the answer. So, the utilization of mathematics dumped the conclusions about the world made by religious scholars into the bin. Irrespective of this, you may ask that religion may still not have lost its whole importance, because we could still use science to figure out the objective reality. It could remain there, and spiritual religions can be used to judge the ethical, to make the ethical judgments, like judgments on homosexuality, the role of women, etc., etc. And that did happen to a certain extent in the Victorian era and the 20th century Iran, and even some religious scholars still suggested today. But in the modern world, this idea remains mostly extinct. But also, what did not happen, is interestingly, is that Nietzsche's prediction about losing all meaning and resorting to nihilism, pessimism, didn't turn out to be true at all. What happened was the emergence of a new religion in the 18th century, one which would make us our own gods and leave all the other religions behind. Humanism is the name of that religion. Pardon. Humanism believes that all individuals have an inner voice or an authentic self that they need to listen to. And it is only that one voice of our true self which must govern us. It provided an alternative to the ethical judgment made by the God centric religions. That is, knowledge, according to humanist religion, is equal to sensitivity into experiences. Our experiences and the meaning we determine of them through our sensitivity is what actually builds our knowledge. For example, if I need to gain knowledge about the soldier life, academic insight would only provide me a glimpse. Reading books would not make me a soldier, and not nor it will tell me about the true difficulties or challenges that a soldier actually goes through. Thus, to fully procure the knowledge about the life in military, I need to pursue the experience of becoming a soldier. Thus, according to humanism, the sole goal of any human must be to go from the path of ignorance to the path of enlightenment by increasing our knowledge via various intellectual, spiritual, and emotional experiences, not by religion, by reading some religious scriptures or holy books. All the liberal, conservative, socialist, and even fascist ideas after the 18th century were based on this humanist idea of discovering the true self. The liberal idea of beauty lies in the eye of beholder or voter knows the best is based on this belief that if our inner self feels that this is right, then it is right, until and unless it harms anybody else. The socialist idea of the collective good is the final good, or state knows the best, is based on the belief that our experiences as a community is what really matters, as it gives us a sense of belongingness and collectiveness. The fascist idea of that this X race is superior to Y race, which was actually adopted by Hitler, saying that Aryans are superior to Jews, that idea was born out of the belief that natural selection exterminates the weak and the strong continues to dominate. Thus, the unique experience of a superior race is what is important there. And this actually justified Hitler to harm other nations because of his ideal that Nazis are the sole engines of human progress, and they are meant to be selected by natural selection. So they are justified to just destroy all the nations that they deem to be inferior to them. So all branches of humanism, how different they may be in their ideologies and their context, all of them point to only one thing, that the unique experiences of humans are important. So, the closest thing that any spiritual religion has to offer to the concept of humanism would be Buddhism, Jainism, and some forms of Hinduism, as well as philosophies of Greeks, Romans, and Stoics, which made an attempt to dive into the intricacies of self and observe the different sensations, emotions, and thoughts. And in fact, these were the philosophies that came up with the first ideas about democracy in the ancient Greece, and even the panchayat system that existed under the villages in the Hindu villages in the ancient times was a very liberal democratic idea. However, today the ultimate humanist ideas of equality, freedom, liberty, and justice are what truly govern us today, because most of our governments follow them. Today, murder is a crime not because God said thou shalt not kill, but because it harms the feeling of the other person and society. How bad they feel in general is also most of the time proportional to the severity of their punishment. That is why we go on hanging rapists and sentencing only some jail time for trespassers. Only if the collective feelings of the people about these crimes were the opposite, the scenario of punishment would be reversed. So, not only this, humanism also gave us the power to utilize science to our own purposes. When we went on to invent the light bulb, the steam engines, and foster electricity, we did not ask God whether He approved of this or not. Nor did we ever took into account the force of God while solving astronomical equations. If we wanted to invent the bulb, we did it. If we wanted to measure the distance between the sun and the earth, we did it. We asked no one, we got validated by no one but ourselves. Thus, the very progress made by the humanist ideals in just a few centuries sidelined religion's way of the scientific spectrum and proved the irrelevance of God. So, why haven't religions still disappeared yet? You may ask. Well, the only reason why religions only seem to maintain a large following is because even though God is dead, it takes a while to get rid of the body. Interestingly, even the priests and religious devotees today are bound by the liberal humanist ideas. If the rabbis in Jerusalem are angry with the Pride Month that takes place in the capital city, they go on saying that it has hurt our sentiments and hurt their feelings instead of lecturing how homosexuality is against God's will. In fact, even now, if you yourself are offended by what Nietzsche said, you will say it has hurt your sentiments and your feelings about God rather than saying it has hurt God itself, which further proves Nietzsche's point. So, when the liberal idea of allowing women and lower caste people to temples was made in India, religion had to adjust there. Thus, the role of gods and God centric religion has been reduced from being authoritative to just reactionary. Adoption of humanism hammered the final nail into the coffin of the gods and crowned ourselves as our own gods. We have become Nietzsche's Superman, making our own meaning out of meaninglessness. But just like any other religion, humanism too is sowing the very seeds of its own destruction as it makes an attempt to utilize science to defy death, attain divinity, and enjoy eternal bliss. So, coming soon, humanism, history,